Hello there, and welcome to this online worship service. Can I invite you to try and make sure that you can settle down quietly somewhere? If possible, make sure that there is some silence around you. As you will see as we go through the service, particularly as we get towards the end, silence will be an important element. But right now, anything but silence as we open with one of the great hymns of the faith. Praise my soul, the King of heaven. Now let us pray together. Lord of all being throned afar, your glory flames from sun and star, center and soul of every sphere, yet to each loving heart, how near. Majestic God, once more we come to acknowledge and celebrate your glory that flames from sun and star. We come to acknowledge and celebrate and to marvel at the fact that your love seeks and finds each one of us just as we are. Your glory, your power defies the understanding of our minds, and yet you concern yourself with us. Forgive us that we so often have tried to fit you, to squeeze you into a mold that has been shaped by our puny minds. We've tried to make you in our image instead of allowing you to be God, infinitely beyond us and yet within us. So receive our praise, you King of heaven. Receive our thanks for your fatherly care which ransoms, heals, restores, and forgives us. Receive now our worship, with all its imperfections, and help us to know the reality of your presence in our midst, wherever we are at this moment. For we ask it in the name of Jesus. Amen. I'm going to read from the Old Testament in the book of the prophet Isaiah. I'm going to read chapter 35. It's the whole chapter, but that's only 10 verses, so don't get too disturbed. Isaiah chapter 35, and reading from verse 1. Picture, by the way, of a beautiful future. The desert and the parched land will be glad. The wilderness will rejoice and blossom. Like the crocus, it will burst into bloom. It will rejoice greatly and shout for joy. The glory of Lebanon will be given to it, the splendor of Carmel and Sharon. They will see the glory of the Lord, the splendor of our God. Strengthen the feeble hands. Steady the knees that give way. Say to those with fearful hearts, be strong and do not fear. Your God will come. He will come with vengeance. With divine retribution, he will come to save you. And then will the eyes of the blind be opened and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then will the lame leap like a deer and the mute tongue shout for joy. Water will gush forth in the wilderness and streams in the desert. The burning sand will become a pool, the thirsty ground, bubbling springs. In the haunts where jackals once lay, grass and reeds and papyrus will grow, and a highway will be there. It will be called the way of holiness. It will be for those who walk on that way. The unclean will not journey on it. Wicked fools will not go about on it. No lion will be there, nor any ravenous beast. They will not be found there. But only the redeemed will walk there. And those the Lord has rescued will return. They will enter Zion with singing. Everlasting joy will crown their heads. Gladness and joy will overtake them, and sorrow and sighing will flee away. And then we turn to the Gospel. Luke's Gospel, chapter 13, and we read from verse 10 to verse 17. Luke 13, from verse 10. On a Sabbath, Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues, and a woman was there who had been crippled by a spirit for 18 years. She was bent over and could not straighten up at all. When Jesus saw her, he called her forward and said to her, "Woman, you are set free from your infirmity." And then he put his hands on her, and immediately she straightened up and praised God. Indignant because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, the synagogue leaders said to the people, "There are 6 days for work, so come and be healed on those days, not on the Sabbath." The Lord answered them, "You hypocrites! Doesn't each of you on the Sabbath untie your ox or donkey from the stall and lead it out and give it water? Then should not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has kept bound for 18 long years, be set free on the Sabbath day from what bound her?" When he said this, all his opponents were humiliated, but the people were delighted with all the wonderful things that he was doing. And we thank God for that word. Amen. You know, whenever I read that passage in Luke's Gospel, I think of a man that we used to see walking the streets of Paarl when we lived there. He was elderly, he was thin, he always wore a hat, and he walked bent over double. Not just stooped, he literally bent 90 degrees from the waist. We used to see him quite often, usually in the vicinity of the local Spar supermarket. I would think of the effects that this disability must have had on him, because he always looked so uncomfortable, keeping his head up enough to keep his hat on, for starters. Clearly, he had a very limited view of the world around him. It must have been very difficult to get a safe view of the world. I mean, crossing the road would have been a hazard. Just seeing where he was going would have been very awkward, and he always looked so alone. At least whenever we saw him, he was alone. And I suppose one can understand why. Conversation with him must have been very difficult, both for him and for anyone trying to engage him in conversation. I guess he must have felt very cut off from his fellow human beings. It was easy to see the difference that it would have made to him if he could have been healed and begin to live an upright life. Now, it's easy for me to transfer those images to the story of the woman in that gospel reading. And I can understand the huge difference it would have made to her for her to be healed. As we look at that story, please note once again that the Bible is quite clear that God wants his people to enjoy wholeness and not be subjected to the limitations and restrictions of things that bind us and rob us of the blessing of that wholeness. Did you notice how in that story, the story of that disabled woman, we are told that as soon as Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, "Woman, you are set free." No promptings, no questions, no tricks, no preconditions. His response to her need was immediate. There is more than enough evidence in Scripture to show us that anything less than wholeness is not part of God's intention for human beings. That lovely Old Testament passage that we read makes it clear that it's been God's intention from the beginning. It's part of his ultimate plan, part of his purpose for humanity is for the healing and wholeness of the nations and of individuals as well. And that time will come. And yet, as we know only too well, there's a great lack of wholeness in the world today. There is much bentness, if we can call it that. And it's right there amongst us in the world in which we live today. Bentness of many kinds. Bentness that has on us the same effect that her bentness had on the woman in that story. It's a bentness that limits us. It isolates us, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually as well. And however that bentness may express itself, the effect on us is similar to the effect that her bentness had on that woman. And it remains the intention of Jesus that people should not be robbed of the wholeness, of the blessing of wholeness in their lives either. Jesus still wills for his people today, and that includes you and me. He still wills that we should be released and set free from the effects of any bentness that is crippling us in our lives today. Now, I don't know whether any of you would want to regard yourself as bent over in any way, other than maybe a bit of a stoop that comes with the advancing years. As far as I know, none of us are literally, physically bent over double. But there are different kinds of bentness, and there are different kinds of healing for those different kinds of bentness. That Old Testament passage spoke of various kinds of healing, and I don't think we do that passage any violence at all if we suggest that the healing it speaks of does not need to be understood only in terms of a literal and physical healing. The passage spoke, for example, of a time when the eyes of the blind would be opened, the ears of the deaf unstopped, the lame would leap like a deer, and the dumb would sing aloud. I'm sure the prophet did envisage that for some people it would be a literal and physical healing. But I'm also sure that there are other kinds of healing to which we can apply those ideas. For example, the eyes of some of us are blind. No, not physically. But if we're to be made whole, our eyes must be opened in other ways. Some people, maybe some of us, have such a short-sighted and limited view of what life is all about, what it means, its significance. Many people are blinded to everything else in life by the flashy glare of material riches. Some people, as they stand alongside a grave, can see no further than the coffin and a hole in the ground. And many, many people are completely blind to eternal values. Healing is needed. The eyes of the blind need to be opened. And we could say much the same sort of thing about the deaf and the lame and the dumb. People suffer a metaphorical deafness, lameness, dumbness, and before they can enjoy the wholeness that is God's intention for them, there needs to be a healing. But what about bentness? Is there a metaphorical bentness from which we and others may suffer? Well, when you think of the effects of the bentness on that woman, then perhaps we can see that there are some of those same effects that have a bearing on our lives, and may show us that some of us do indeed suffer from some kind of bentness. For example, one of the effects of bentness is that you get a limited and rather distorted view of life and the world around you. It's difficult to see where you're going. Doesn't that describe exactly how some of us are feeling about the world that we're currently living in? Where is COVID going? Will we ever be free of it? Am I safe? Are my loved ones safe? What's the future? What's it going to be like? And it's not just COVID-related things either. Politically, especially after the shambles of an election last week, where are we going in this country? What is the future? Economically, we are only too aware of the economic shambles in which this country is struggling at the moment. An economy that may have a bearing, quite a serious bearing, on the futures of some of us and the people around us. What's in store for us? We can't see where this is going. And as for load shedding, well, will it ever end? We don't know where we are going. It's a confusing world right now, and our view of it is limited, it's restricted, it's incomplete, it's distorted. And the consequence is that we have to deal with feelings of uncertainty and insecurity and anxiety and stress. And it all contributes to us being robbed of an experience of God's gift of wholeness. Another example, one of the effects of being physically bent is that you get cut off from other people. Communication with others becomes a problem. You can't look other people in the eye. Simple conversation becomes difficult. There's a barrier between us and others. And again, I suspect, in fact, I know, that some of us are affected by that kind of restriction, that kind of bentness. Barriers do exist between us and other people. And the barriers may be caused by all sorts of things. For example, ignorance about the culture of somebody else. Ignorance about the living conditions of somebody else. Feelings of superiority or inferiority. Suspicion of others and their motives. Resentments. Lack of forgiveness. There are many things that cause barriers between ourselves and other people. And the effect of those things is that it cuts us off from other people, even family members, colleagues, fellow Christian people, fellow church members, people of other religions, people of other races, other language groups. There's just a lack of understanding of other people and their circumstances, and that affects relationships and causes barriers. And of course, COVID has created another barrier. Isolation, masks, social distancing, it all has an effect. And being alienated from other people also affects the wholeness that God intends for us. And just very briefly, a third effect of bentness is the discomfort, the sheer physical oppression of the thing. And I think most of us know something of this in one way or another. I'm thinking of things that affect us physically, yes, mentally, emotionally, things that burden us, weigh us down, chronic pain. Some of you know all about that. Worry, disappointments, insecurity as we look at the future. Things like this can bend us, bow us down. So, if all these things have the ability to deprive us of that wholeness that is God's intention for us, is there a solution? Well, I guess you'll realize that I wouldn't be preaching this sermon if I didn't believe that there is at least something that we can do to claim a little more of the wholeness that God intends for us. Because I know well that this time that we're living in is a stressful time for all of us. Some of our securities have been removed, or at least been affected in some way or another. Some of our usual means of easing the stresses in our lives have been removed or limited. We're all just a little bowed down, aren't we? One of the things that I like about the way that Luke tells the story of the bent woman is that, according to Luke, Jesus didn't need any cajoling, persuading. He didn't wait for some kind of faith response from the woman. He didn't expect that she would have all the answers and the correct dogma and doctrine and correct beliefs. Luke says that when Jesus saw her, he called her forward. Just like that. Jesus saw the need and responded. But the woman had to do something. She had to come forward. She had to respond to the invitation from Jesus. She had to put herself in a position where Jesus could minister to her, where he could lay his hands on her. If she'd refused to come forward, if she'd refused his invitation, I don't think she would have been healed. She had to allow him to minister to her. She had to receive the gift. If you can identify with any of the bentnesses that I've mentioned this morning, or if you can identify anything else in your life that is disturbing you, troubling you, oppressing you in some way, bending you over, then maybe this is a moment when you could hear Jesus say to you, come, let me minister to you. Son, daughter, you are set free. It's true that whatever is causing the bentness may not change. It may still be there, probably will be. But your way of looking at it, your way of dealing with it could change. The negative effect that it has on you could change because you're looking at it from an upright position. Son, daughter, stand tall. Receive the gift of wholeness. You are set free. Live the upright life. Let us pray. Loving Lord Jesus, so many aspects of life these days are difficult for us. They leave us feeling bowed beneath the pressures. So in this silence now, we acknowledge before you some of those things that oppress us, some of those things that bend us. Our fears, our insecurities, our anxieties for ourselves and those that we love. Maybe broken relationships, chronic pain, emotional distress, whatever it may be. Lord Jesus, we simply now acknowledge it in your presence. It's there. It bugs us. It robs us of your gift of wholeness and peace of mind. We hear your invitation. Come. In the stillness now we stand before you. In the quiet, we look into your face of compassion. We hear your words, son, daughter, you are set free. And as we stand tall in the face of whatever would bend us over, Lord, may we know a new wholeness, a new joy, a new hope. And help us to know that this is real and not merely a fragment of our imagination. Receive our thanks. Amen. Our closing hymn is one that also invites us to come to Jesus and to receive his touch of healing and wholeness. I heard the voice of Jesus say, "Come unto me and rest." invite we close with words that you know very well, but receive these words not just as the words that close the service. For we are saying, may the blessing of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit be with you always. Amen.